Good morning, everyone. We will be starting shortly. Hi, so good morning again, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you're doing well. And on this important webinar, we will be covering the critical changes in Australia Business and Investment Program to be implemented in July 2021. So on our agenda today, we will highlight the current program requirements, then moving on to the critical changes and how it impacts your migration application. And lastly, the process and timeline to apply before the rules become more stringent. So just to start off, our organization, Global Migration Solutions, and in short GMS, is based in Kuala Lumpur and ANZ Migration in Singapore. We are seen as pioneers in the industry and offer migration services. Our main programs include Australia, New Zealand, Portugal, USA, and also recently Canada. As a premier migration firm, we have more than 16 years experience with 99% success record. Our success record is due to the thorough assessment we conduct upon accepting any migration cases. So we have helped more than 12,000 families migrate successfully. Currently, we have 5 offices across Asia Pacific, which is Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, Vietnam, and also Hong Kong. And we have been awarded Global Migration Agency. So before we start, let me just briefly introduce our presenters for today, who are both licensed immigration advisors for Australia and New Zealand. Firstly, Desmond Ang, our MD for GMS, has 16 years experience in the migration industry. Desmond has a strong background in financial and was a certified chartered accountant with PwC before his migration career for at least 8 years. And secondly, James Allen Hall, the MD for ANZ Migration. He is a certified professional development trainer for migration agents. As a pioneer in the industry, he has more than 17 years of experience in the migration scene. Before that, he had a corporate career in IT, working as a certified project manager with IBM and handled clients across many industries. So they have both been awarded Global Top 25 for migration services under the U Global Immigration Magazine, as you can see here. And combined, James and Desmond have both 30 years experience in the migration scene. Both these experts work closely to support the Malaysia and Singapore offices. Here as well, as you can see, they are licensed immigration advisors in Australia and New Zealand. And it is very important to engage with licensed migration agents for your migration journey, just to ensure security and also reliable information. So before I bring on the speakers, just a final reminder, we have the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So feel free to write your questions in the chat box, and we will try to cover them as much as we can at the end of the session. So without further ado, I would like to introduce James. You can take over.
Thank you, Hazel. Good morning, everyone. So my name is James. I'm a registered migration agent for Australia, and we're also licensed immigration advisors for New Zealand. Okay. Now, I'll first talk about why people are migrating to Australia. And of course, we're looking mostly here in this presentation at high net wealth individuals. Over the last few years, Australia has been gaining popularity. Prior to about 2016, the US was the favored #1 destination for high net wealth individuals globally, so they would migrate to the US. But since about 2017 onwards, we've seen Australia become #1. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And some of the reasons we've got listed here, they include safety, education, the healthcare system, lifestyle, the opportunities that are available, the living standards, financial matters, and taxes. And it's interesting because you may not think of Australia as a low taxation environment, but there are a lot of lower taxes that impact high net wealth individuals, in particular inheritance tax. So the US has inheritance tax, Australia doesn't. And that's quite significant for high level business and investor people. And also a very friendly government environment. You can see some of the statistics here. So in the last recorded year, which is the 2019 for the reports on the movement of high net wealth individuals, you'll see that Australia is #1 with 12,000 people moving. So very high numbers. US is now second at just over 10,000. And this has been the change since about 2016-17 that Australia has emerged as the #1 preferred destination. You can also see here, under the same reporting, the outflow. So the inflow is to Australia as #1, and this list is the countries for outflow of high net wealth individuals. So we can see the countries here that are losing the high net wealth individuals and business people and investors. And you can see actually Malaysia is one of the top countries on this list. And actually, it's not listed here, but also the US is an emerging country on this list that's now starting to see a significant outflow of people migrating. So let's talk about the current business and investor program for Australia. So the current program for Australia is made up of 2 different visa types under the 188 and the 132. And within each of these, there are multiple streams, and the streams cover different types of visa applications. For example, going through as a business person or an investor. So we'll talk briefly through these. The first one is called the 188A, or the Business Innovation Stream. Now, I think of this as business owner rather than innovation, because you don't have to do anything specifically innovative. But this is for people that are established business owners. So you need a history of owning and managing a business first. And that business that's typically overseas needs to demonstrate a turnover of at least 500,000 Australian dollars. You then invest some money in a business in Australia, you manage that business in Australia, and you can move on to PR. We have an investor stream where you invest money in Australia, and the 188B requires an investment of 1.5 million into a government bond in Australia for 4 years. We have the significant investor visa, which is the 188C, and this is a higher level investment of 5 million, and it's in a structured fund investment in Australia. And that has much better interest rates and earnings than the government bond. So it's a more attractive investment. And this is Australia's golden visa in the sense that a lot of the requirements are waived by investing a larger amount of funds. So the age requirement is waived, there's no English requirement, there's no specific business or investment experience requirement. It's a matter of showing that you legally have that $5 million and are able to invest that in Australia. So you will see applicants under this who get the money through inheritance or even gifted. We do have applications where parents will give money to their children to actually do this SIV, Significant Investor Visa, for this $5 million investment. The Premium Investor Visa was an initiative started by the government in recent years, but hasn't taken off, and that requires a $15 million investment. So this has been a very limited program. To date, I believe only one person has actually gone through this program. So it's certainly something that's not popular. It's a very high investment amount and little benefit over the $5 million investor visa. We have the entrepreneur stream, which is the 188E. This is a relatively new scheme. It started around October 2016. The other visa streams are from 2012, just to give you a comparison. So the 188E started in late 2016, and it's part of the Australian government's initiative to promote innovation, startups, and so on in Australia. And it requires the applicant to do a startup business or activity in Australia. with at least 200,000 in funding from an external source, which is typically from a venture capital fund. So that's the requirement for this. And of course, it has to be an innovative entrepreneurial type activity in Australia. We then have the top tier programs under the 132. I say top tier because the 188 pathways are all two-stage pathways where you're required to get a temporary visa, go to Australia and meet certain requirements such as running the business or doing investments before you can then qualify for the permanent residence under the permanent residence stream. But with the 132 visas, they're directly to permanent residence. And one of the key benefits with that is there is no prescribed amount of time that the applicant must be in Australia. And typically with the 132, we're looking at high-level business people that have high-level businesses overseas, starting with a turnover for the business overseas of 3 million Australian dollars equivalent. And so because they've got such a big business overseas, they generally don't want to spend a lot of time in Australia. They want to get the PR. They want to have the options there, the security of the PR. Maybe their children are going to go to Australia and study. And this 132 option allows that. It allows them to continue living overseas, but they can run that business in Australia remotely while they're overseas, and they don't have a prescribed amount of time they must spend in Australia. So we have the 132A, which is for business owners. And as I said, the minimum turnover for this is $3 million equivalent. So Australian $3 million equivalent turnover in their current businesses. We have the 132, which is a bigger version of the entrepreneur visa. And instead of the 200,000 in agreed funding, we're looking at $1 million in agreed funding. So that's an interesting pathway as well. These pathways, as I said, are very popular because they are direct permanent residence pathways, but they're the top tier in terms of the business visa, business and investor visa offerings. Now, some good news, despite all the other bad news that's been going on for the last year or so, is that the Australian government is very, very focused on business and investor visas. Other programs like the general skilled migration, we're seeing reductions in the quota and we're seeing it becoming more difficult. But the government is very focused on the business and investment program and is taking steps to make this more available. And one of those is in the Australian budget last year, which was delayed until October. The budget determines the planning levels, so the quota, the number of available places for the program. And when that was finally announced in October, the government announced that they were doubling the number of places available under the business and investment visa program. So normally we're looking at just under 7,000 places a year. It is now being increased to 13,500. So this is a huge increase. At the same time, the government has announced that they are going to improve the processing times. We have seen significant delays in processing over the last few years. These visas a few years ago would take around 8 months, but we've seen it gradually increasing to up to 2 years in some cases for the processing time. So the government has indicated they are going to improve the processing time and make these faster. And we are seeing some results from that already. And another thing the government has done, despite the very restrictive travel bans for Australia that limit who can travel to Australia, they are exempting people that are on both the 132 and the 188 business visas. So if you hold these visas, you can travel to Australia during this travel ban period when you wouldn't normally be able to on, let's say, a tourist visa. So we'll talk about some of the critical changes that are coming up and what they mean to people looking at these visa pathways. And Desmond will talk more about this in a moment. So one of the good things about the approach the government has, and there are lots of good things the Australian government does in terms of how it handles migration. And some of these are, it's a very transparent system. And an example of that is, as practitioners, Desmond and myself have access to the internal procedure and policy manuals that the department uses to assess the cases. So when we look at a case and we evaluate a case, we're able to look at what the internal policy and procedure manuals are that the case officers use to assess. So we can make sure that all of that criteria is going to be met before we submit the application. And that's part of why we have a very, very high success rate in what we do. Now, another part of that transparency is that when the government is looking at making significant changes to the business and investment program, they actually have a discussion with stakeholders, and they will do a review, and they will listen to feedback on the program. And we've had a couple of these reviews, and the last one was completed around 2019. We were expecting the changes to be implemented last year, but due to the COVID situation, these have been deferred. And the government has now come out just recently to announce the planned changes as a result of that review, and they will be implemented later this year. Now, under the review, the things the government is looking at increasing the investment minimums, so the thresholds, looking at how the points test can be restructured to encourage higher investment. The goal here of the government is obviously to seek better outcomes for Australia through this program. And the goals of the review are all oriented around that. Looking at a better composition of the investment options. So as I mentioned before, the two investment options we have currently are 1.5 million in a government bond, which is a very stagnant form of investment that doesn't really do much to encourage or stimulate the economy in Australia, and the 5 million, which goes into commercial funds. And that one is a good option, and the government likes that and is looking at ways that it may be able to improve that. The government's also looking at ways it can incentivize doing business in regional parts of Australia. And in fact, some of the state governments will actually have steps to encourage this. As an example, if you're doing a business visa for Queensland, then the government will say, if you're doing the smaller business visa, they'll say, look, if you're going to do a small business like a restaurant or a retail shop, we want you to do it outside of the Brisbane area. So for example, do it in the Gold Coast, Surfers Paradise or Sunshine Coast, as an example. So the states are also doing steps to encourage this as well. The government's also looking at simplifying the visa program, and they do that through consolidating the visas and reducing the options so it becomes a simpler framework to deal with. And there will be other things that they will consider over time to improve the program. So one of the things the government is looking at is increasing the investment threshold. So with the various visa options that I talked about before, the business owner, the business innovation, the investor streams, they are looking at areas where they can increase the investment threshold. And this is a trend that typically occurs. I mean, all countries look at increasing the investment amounts over time. The US recently did that with their EB5 program. Other countries do it as well. So they look at how they can increase the program in a way that still attracts the investment to Australia, but also benefits the Australian economy. So the results you can see here on the screen are the accumulated outcomes that have been discussed through the review programs. Not all of these will necessarily be implemented, but they are certainly up for consideration. And the government is looking at how they can implement the results of the survey in a way that is practical and effective. So we're looking at, for the 188A, for the business owners, we're looking at how the government can increase the requirements for that. That will involve increasing the assets that need to be available, the actual turnover of the business. For the 188B investor stream, as I mentioned, it's a 1.5 million in a government bond. The government has already said that they don't see this as a very effective program in the sense of contributing to the Australian economy. The money goes into a government bond, it's very stagnant, it doesn't do much. So they are really looking for more forms of active investment, but they're also looking at increasing the threshold. The thing to keep in mind with this, I mentioned before, the previous quota was just under 7,000 places. We were seeing that quota used up before the end of each program year. And in fact, in the previous program year, even despite the COVID interruptions, we saw all of those places used up after about probably about 7-8 months. All of those places were used up and didn't actually last the whole program year. So the demand is very, very high. So the government can increase the requirements and still fulfill the program and utilize all the available places. The significant investor stream, the 188C, the $5 million investment, they're looking at how they can make that improved. And a lot of the respondents that took part in the review indicated a preference to increase that investment. So between to 6 to 10 million. So that's something the government is considering as part of this review. And the entrepreneur stream, the 188E, the proposed model was to get rid of the venture capital funding because that created a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulty, and that is actually being removed and will be replaced with an enhanced nomination model by the state or territory government. So rather than rely upon the applicant having to secure venture capital funding to prove the suitability of their business idea or their startup idea, it will rely upon the state or territory government to actually evaluate and confirm that they think this is a good entrepreneurial business activity to do. It's very likely that the model for this will be based upon the South Australia Investment Innovation Pilot. There's a pilot program that's been running in South Australia where the South Australian government works with industry incubators. So these are organizations and often partnerships with universities that facilitate and support startup activities. And it's very likely that the government will turn to these industry bodies to do the evaluation of that entrepreneurial idea and confirm that it is a good idea to actually proceed with for this visa pathway. So you can see here the two investments that I talked about before, the 1.5 million government bond and the 5 million 188C fund investment. Now, currently that fund investment goes into a structured fund, which is 3 million in a fund that's set up for the client. They do 500,000 into a venture capital fund, and then the remaining 1.5 million goes into an emerging share fund. So these are smaller shares on the Australian stock market. It's very likely that the government will transition the current 1.5 million bond investment to a mini version of the $5 million structured fund. And that's a great thing for investors because it will give them potentially much better returns than the current bond arrangement. But the drawback is it's very likely that 1.5 million will increase to 2.5, maybe even 3 million as the investment minimum. And we'll likely see these changes implemented sometime this year or possibly later this year, depending upon the timeframe the government decides upon. So the changes also include removing some of the options. Now, I talked about the 132 as being the prime business visas. These are the ones that our clients aspire to. These are the ones that are the preferred ones because they don't have any prescribed minimum time in Australia and they are direct permanent residents. Unfortunately, the bad news is the government is removing these options and they will no longer be available from the 1st of July. So the new program year, which starts on the 1st of July, will not include the 132 visa options. So we will not have any direct permanent residence visa options available from the 1st of July. Now, that doesn't mean that these options will be available until then. It's very common when the government makes significant changes that they stop the previous program earlier rather than continuing until the new changes are implemented. So we don't know. And that's one of the reasons that when we talk about this, we do say, if you are going to use these options, do it soon, because we don't know what changes may happen in the interim. We don't know if the government will close the door earlier in preparation for these changes to be implemented on the 1st of July. Okay. So points test, we may see an increase in the points test for these visas pathways. So for those who are not familiar, some of these visa pathways have a points test where points are given for factors like age, qualifications, amount of business management experience or investment experience, assets, business turnover, and various other factors. And points are given for these. Now, so far, the points have not been actively used as a way to discriminate between different applicants. It is under a system like the General Skilled Migration, where applicants fight for the points and preferences go to people with the highest points. But under the business migration, generally it hasn't been used in that way. It's just been used as a yes or no. Do you meet the minimum points, which is 65 points? An exception to that is the Victorian government has at times when the places have become limited, so when the program is getting towards later in the year when the available places have been taken up, they have used this as a way to differentiate between applicants. But generally it hasn't been used by immigration to do that. It's just been used as a yes/no. So we might see an emphasis on this to determine who is more qualified as an applicant versus who is less qualified as an applicant. We will see more of an incentive for regional businesses we talked about and possibly priority processing for people that are taking steps to do businesses in regional areas of Australia. As I mentioned, some of the state and territory governments are very receptive and will make it easier for you if you are looking at doing a business in a regional area of Australia. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Desmond, and Desmond will talk about the impact of these changes and what we expect to happen.
Hi, James, thank you. And hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Desmond. Nice meeting all of you. Very quickly, I would like to take all of you for an overview of those applying for the application now, and what is the likely impact of applying for the application after 1st of July. Now, let's start off with the 188A, the Business Innovation Stream Visa. So based upon what was being shared earlier, so you're looking at the Australian government trying to increase the caliber of the applicants in terms of their experience, for those who is able to generate a higher turnover from the current business, for example. So these are the current requirements that will qualify you to apply for the 188A. So the government is looking at increasing the turnover. So this is the turnover referring to your current business. So and this is confirmed, the requirements is going to go from 500,000 to 800,000. So for those who is meeting the requirements just above 500,000, and you might not be able to apply for these programs anymore subsequent to 1st of July, right? So this might be the window for you to act on it. So likewise, the assets. So the current requirements would require you to own an assets worth of 800,000. And after 1st of July, this number is going to go up to 1.25 million. Okay, of course, we are expecting to see an increase on the investment amount. So that will be the requirements for you to spend more in terms of setting up your business over in Australia. Now, let's look at this investor stream, the 188B. In fact, this is one of the very popular programs among all, except beside the 132. And reason being, some of you out there or some of our clients are not ready to run a business in Australia, rather than investing into the government bond, passive investment, not risking the investment. So after 1st of July, so potentially you are going to have to invest more, somewhere between 2 to 3 million. Just to share with you, for New Zealand, the last changes had increased. The New Zealand government had increased 1.5 million to become 3 million. So we are expecting the Australian government most likely following the same decision. And importantly, if you are looking at keeping your investment safe into the government bond, this might not be an option anymore after 1st of July. Yeah, like what James has just shared with you, this 188B is going to be likely going to be a small or mini 188C programs. Let's have a look at 188C. So 188C, other than having a higher investment from 5 million to 6 to 10 million, but importantly, you know, the composition of the investment. So the government is also increasing the higher portion into the capital, venture capital fund, which is relatively a slightly higher investment fund as compared to the small cap and balancing investment. Yeah, so these are you can see, you know, the changes are quite significant. Not only the investment amount, but also, you know, the types of the investment that you are putting, you know, you're going into. Last but not the least, importantly, this subclass 132A. So if you met the requirements as in your current business, achieve a 3 million turnover, or already making a 3 million turnover worth of a business. So these would be the options that you should not be, you know, you should not miss out. Because after 1st of July, this program is going to be cancelled. Yeah, and this is a direct PR programs. So as compared to all others, including 188C, having to invest 5 million, you don't get a direct PR, but these programs allow you and your family members to become a PR immediately after the visa is granted. So this is the window for you to act on it. And for those who could qualify for these programs, for those who already been running a business for at least 2 years, having a shareholding of 30%, a turnover of at least 3 million. If you have more than one business, you can combine up to 2 companies to achieve this 3 million. Yeah, and your business and your personal asset would need to have a minimum of 1.5 million. Yeah, and these programs, what is interesting about these programs is there is no minimum residency requirements per se after the PR is granted, because you're able to run the business remotely from your own country, based in Malaysia or anywhere, you know, in the world. While all you need to do is to demonstrate you supervising and making the business decision over on your business in Australia. Yeah, from your own home. So this investment is 1 to 2.5 million, depending on what you're setting up. If you are running any other non-property development business, often the time is 1 million. If you intended to go into the property development more types of business model, often the time it is 2.5 million. Yeah. Right. So importantly, I would like to share with you what is the processing time, and also what should you be looking at within these 6 months before the July changes. All right. So this gives you an idea on when should you be acting on it, right? And what do you need to go through before July. So as a standard procedures, we always start off with, you know, a full review and eligibility check before we have you on board. Yeah. So it takes times because we need to look at all your documentation in review. Yeah, documents in detail to make sure that you meet all the requirements, immigration's requirements. So this generally takes approximately 1 month. And should you meet all the requirements, we will take you on to the next step, which is to submit an expression of interest. Okay, so after submitting the expression of interest, you are deciding where you are investing or where you are going to set up your business. So we have to approach the respective states immigration and obtain a nomination for you. Yeah, so that there will be, you know, this will be the step 3. We are putting in the state's nomination application, and it takes time, generally 1 month to 2 months, for the state's governments to even process and accept your application. Now, the step 4 is very important, and I highlight this cutoff point. So it is the state's government approval that lead you to the next step, which is to receive an EOI invitation. Now, this EOI invitation needs to come through before 1st of July. Yeah. And what does it mean by the cutoff point? Effectively, when you receive the EOI invitation, you are safe. You are given another 60 days to lodge the application, but you secure the chances of being able to submit the application based upon the current requirements and the current rules and regulation. Okay, so if you look at this timeline, after the visa submission, and it takes you another 20 to 30 months, yeah, based on the current processing times to even get the visa approval. So what you're doing right now or today is really a plan for the future. And but for those who is looking at having the visa earlier, like what James had just shared with you earlier, the Australian government is committed to cut down the processing time. And we have seen over the past 1 year, especially with the border restrictions and the mobility control, a lot of our clients are desperately waiting for this decision or the visa to come through, because the current restrictions on the border controls is only given the priority to if you are a PR or you are a citizen, and if you are a 188 or 132 visa holder. Okay, so a lot of you out there, we do understand the challenges that you're facing at the moment, having to, to send your kids over to Australia to study and not being able to do so. So that increases the needs of this visa of 188 or 132 to come earlier. So a piece of advice over here that we would like to, remind you is we see for those who begin the process around February or latest by March, should stay safe, and you should be able to receive the EOI invitation before 1st of July. And anyone who are not ready and having to do it later, there might be some risk involved in terms of securing the EOI invitation. All right. So I hope that both our sharing does give you good idea on what is coming up next from the Australian government, and then how do you prepare yourself in terms of securing your application before the change, right? So we are keeping this short and direct and straightforward. And should you have any question, we welcome you to be in touch with us, and we would be able to advise you, specifically on your circumstances. So now I believe we have a question and answer. There are some questions raised, and over to you, Hazel. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much again, Desmond and James, for that very informative session. So we have quite a number of questions again today. So let's start off with the first one. The first person is asking, as a holder of TR, while waiting for my PR, are we able to enjoy benefits same as PR, like education and healthcare?
Sure. So, right, maybe I start with the first question.
Sure.
Now, as a visa holder, temporary visa holder, and here we are referring to the 188A, B, C. The benefits that you're enjoying over here is the primary and secondary school education benefits. So you effectively are enjoying the same rate as a PR or citizen. And here we are talking about in primary school, you probably are paying about 300 a year. Those are the activity fee. The school fee is free. So for secondary school, you're probably paying around 1,000 to 1,500. Yeah. There is a delay on the tertiary education until you become a PR. So if your children is already ready at the stage of going into the university, so that benefit starts or comes in when you become a PR. Thank you.
All right. Okay, on to the next one in regards to the investment option. May I know what is the interest rate for government bond?
Sure. I'll answer that. So my turn, I guess. So interest rates at the moment are very low. And in fact, in some cases can even be negative, although the government is capping them at 0% when they are negative. So the thing to understand with the $1.5 million government bond investment is you're not going to see any appreciable return, but it is a safe investment because the base amount is guaranteed and it's with the government treasury. So it's a very secure, safe investment. It is I call it the safe, boring pathway. It's not very exciting. You're not going to get returns, but it is a very safe pathway in that you don't have to worry about running a business in Australia. You put the money in there, you spend some time in Australia, and then you'll get the permanent residency later. The drawback of that is you have to wait for the full 4-year period, whereas if you are doing a business visa, you can potentially get your PR after 1 or 2 years. You can apply for it rather than wait for the full 4 years.
Okay, I think the next one will also be relatable. The investment amount of 1 to 2.5 million required. Will that be the paid up capital of the company that I plan to open there?
So, sure. So this question seems to be for 1 to 2.5 million. No, the answer is no. So this is the 1 to 2.5 million. You decide on how much is the pay up capital, and the balance goes into your working capital. Yeah. So it could be any X amount. There's no minimum requirements on the pay up capital. It could be any amount, and the balance goes into the working capital where you are spending the money to buy, your stocks. You're using the money to buy equipments. You're using the money, to pay the expenses. Yeah.
All right. Okay, on the next one, regarding 188A, for business turnover eligibility, only one business, or can it be combined with 2 businesses?
You can combine up to 2 businesses. So we have what's called a main business or businesses, and it can, by policy, be allowed to include up to 2 businesses. So you can combine the turnover and assets from up to 2 businesses to meet the threshold requirements.
Okay, I'm also coming back to a question for the same person who were asking about the TR earlier. So he did say that my son is in year 1 or university when I'm still holding a TR. By the time I got my PR, he will be enrolling into year 3. Will I enjoy the low education fee for him in year 3?
Your son will be enjoying the benefits when effectively when the AA8 visa is granted, or when the status change to become a PR. All you need to do is just to notify the university with the status, and the school fee is an entitlement for all PR to pay a lower fee.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. So how frequent do I need to stay in Australia in order to qualify as a PR while holding a temporary visa?
Look, this will vary depending upon the pathway you're using. So the amount of minimum time required varies. And you've got both the visa requirements, but you also need to consider the state or territory requirements if they have any additional requirements. But just very quickly, for the 188 business owner, the minimum amount of time is 1 year. For the 188B investor, 1.5 million, it's 2 years. For the 188C, the significant investor, it's greatly reduced, and it's 160 days over the 4-year period. So that's got the lowest amount of time.
Okay. And relations in regards to the same question for 188A earlier, for the business, is it 30% shareholding in both businesses? And how many years do the companies need to exist?
Okay, sure. So we have this thing called main business. Yeah. So to be able to apply for this 188A, you must meet this criteria called managing a main business for a minimum of 2 years, right? So the first answer, the answer to the first question is you must be running a business for a minimum of 2 years. And what would qualify for this main business? So each of these company that you're using to qualify for the main business, you must have a share of minimum 30%. Okay, but that depends on how much is the turnover of the company. So if that company doesn't have a turnover of at least 400,000, yeah, then your share would need to be at least 51%, right? If the company do have a turnover of 500,000 a year, then a minimum of 30% would be enough.
Okay, thank you so much, Desmond, for that. And in terms of business activity that I opened there, do I need to limit only the type of business that I'm doing, or can I be opening any other business?
Generally, our clients do a different kind of business in Australia. It's very common. Most of our clients will do a different kind of business in Australia, often a business they've dreamed about doing. Sometimes it might be a restaurant. It could be, a small business. So generally, they will do a different kind of business. And generally, that's acceptable. And certainly from the visa side, the government doesn't require you to do the same kind of business. The exception at the moment is the Victorian government is a bit strict at the moment. And I find this a bit strange because we've got, an increased number of places available, but despite that, the Victorian government, and not the other governments, but the Victorian government have become very tight for this program year, and they're very focused on economic recovery. And they've said one of the requirements at the moment, the additional requirements, which is not normally there, is that there must be relevant skills from their overseas business to the business they're going to be doing in Victoria. But with the other states, we don't have that limitation at this time. So they can do a different kind of business in Australia if they wish to.
All right. Maybe based on your experience, both James and Desmond, do you have any sort of suggestion in terms of profitable business that you could share as a business migrant?
Jess, would you like to answer? Well, I mean, let's answer some of those. I mean, let both of us answer.
Yeah.
Well, I guess our approach. Well, first of all, we do help our clients not just on the visa application, but our services does cover, the beginning and from A to Z. So basically, we help not only the visa, but we carry the client's hand through in terms of setting up the businesses and with the advisory. So we have our team based in Australia that helps you. Well, in terms of what types of the business, this has always been a question among all our 188 clients or 132 clients. Well, we would want to set a right expectation from the beginning. We wanted to see how, first of all, how much of involvement do they wish to, be engaged in a business. So there are various questions that we should find out. And do they continue to maintain their business back home, right? And is the wife going to be running the business, or they themselves going to be running the business? All right. Where sometimes when the wife runs the business, the wife might have certain passion over certain businesses. Like for example, we do have clients where the business is going to be run by the spouse, the wife, and they go into the beauty types of services, And then we have clients who are looking at who have a passion and is a childhood dream of having a winery. So we actually found, a winery for our clients. So there are various types of the businesses available that are, that we find what the clients wanted to do. And we would be then looking at, whether or not it is feasible, it meets the immigration's requirements. And then, of course, our team do all the due diligence checks on the business before taking over. Yeah.
For my part, I might just mention many countries like Portugal, like New Zealand, allow investment in real estate as a migration pathway. Australia doesn't. But one thing a lot of our clients will do, and it's very interesting, is that while they can't invest directly in residential real estate as an investment pathway, they can invest under the business pathway in a residential property development business. So they invest and get involved in a property development business in Australia that can build, it could be just a couple of houses, or I've got two clients where they're doing a project and they are both partners in the same project, where we're building 88 townhouses. So a very large scale project. So that's an interesting option as well that can be available. So I'm not saying that's necessarily the best kind of business, but it's certainly something that if you're interested in real estate, that you can pursue, and it does get you close to be able to invest in property when you couldn't normally do that as an investment pathway for Australia.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. That's very, very encouraging. So, can we also say that, let's say our clients actually, if they're interested, they shouldn't be worried about thinking about this at the moment. Maybe also come back to us in terms of consultation. They can speak to you
Mhm.
directly with James Desmond in terms of what kind of business and how do they want to start their businesses there, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, on
Mhm.
to the next one, just something relatable. Given the current uncertainty, what if my visa is approved, but it is challenging to start my business now? Is there any sort of exemption?
Mm, mm.
Hmm.
Sure. Well, there is a concession arrangement given by the Australian governments, but again, depending on which visa pathway, there are concession arrangement given on all visa class. I guess just an overview for 188 visa holder, the standard visa periods is 4 years and 3 months. Previously, the extension was 2 years, but now given that these challenges and that might be potentially delaying in setting up the business, the extension is now going from 2 years to 4 years. So you're looking at effectively, you have 4 years current with the current visa standard periods, plus another 4 years, yeah, for them to meet the requirements. In terms of the 188B, it is very interesting. The concession arrangement has been arranged to allow the 188B visa holder to become a PR as fast as 2 years instead of 4 years. So the moment you maintain your investment with the government bond in the government bond for 2 years and fulfill the 2 years residency, then you could choose to convert to become a PR rather than waiting for 4 years later. And the most interesting part about 188C, should you, James mentioned there is 160 days residency requirements. And while you do not wish to move, to travel for the lockdown or for the quarantines, each and every single day that you spend back home goes towards fulfilling the 160 days requirements. So you can see there's a lot of concession arrangement given to allow you to fulfill the requirements and meeting the PR conversion at a later stage.
All right. Thank you so much for that explanation. Okay, just following on the next one. What is the requirement to qualify to graduate from TR to PR? And what happens if you are unsuccessful in obtaining a PR from TR? Does it mean you have to leave Australia?
Sure. Look, the requirements differ for each pathway. So very, very quickly, for the 188 business owner, the business in Australia has to hit a turnover of 300,000 for 1 year. And then you've got a couple of other requirements, which could be having 2 full-time staff, having 200K business assets in the business, or having net personal business assets in Australia of at least 600,000. You can choose any 2 of those 3 requirements. For the investor, 188B, I mentioned it, keep the 1.5 million there for 4 years, spend 2 years in Australia. And for the 188C, keep the 5 million investment for the 4 years and spend 160 days in Australia. So they're the essential requirements for those. And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
And the second part of the question is that if I'm unsuccessful to get the PR from TR, does it mean I have to leave Australia?
Okay, so obviously to stay in Australia, you need a visa. And there are extensions available for 2 of these. So if you can't meet the requirements in that time frame, 2 of these pathways do have extensions to allow 2 years at a time for extensions, and they are the 188A business innovation business owner visa and the significant investor visa, which Desmond touched upon. You can extend that as well. And in fact, we do have some clients that decide to extend the temporary visa even though they could qualify for the PR, because there are some special tax exemptions for overseas income that are only available to temporary visa holders. So especially for very, very high level income people with a lot of revenue, overseas revenue, such as under the $5 million visa where they may have a lot of investments overseas, it can be tax effective to actually extend your temporary visa. But if you're not able to extend and you don't have any other visa to stay on in Australia, then ultimately, yes, you would have to leave the country.
All right. Thank you so much. I think there are more questions coming in. So the next one, can you explain more on the venture capital option? And is it an investment into venture capital fund established in Australia?
Well, no, it's not an investment into venture capital fund. Basically, these programs would require you to secure funding for from venture capital company. Yeah. And this has to be an approved venture capital company under the immigration list. So it is about your company or you having the ability to secure the funding. So these venture capital companies looking at your business being potential business and has an agreement to invest into your company. So you need to secure that for you to be qualified for these visa programs.
Okay. And the next question is, I think, a very direct one. Assuming I have all the papers ready, can I still apply for 132A visa?
Yeah, that's still open. It will not be available in the next program year from the 1st of July. We haven't got any indication when the current program will stop. But yes, if you're ready to do that now, absolutely. And you should go ahead because it's a fantastic option. It's direct PR and it's not going to be available in the future. So yes, we can do that right now.
All right, that's good. Okay, then the next one, under 188B, how does the 2.25 million requirement work and how strict is this requirement?
Right now, there are few criteria on the 188B, but let's talk about this 2.25 million. So this comes under the clause 188.244. So you would need to demonstrate an asset worth of 2.25 million, and you must demonstrate that you own these assets, yeah, and they're legally acquired, and these assets are not given to you as a gift, right? So your assets of 2.25 million, first of all, it could be in terms of property, it could be in terms of the share, it could be in terms of the savings, fixed deposits, and it could also be, if you are a business owner, it could also be business assets that you owned by holding the share percentage, you know. So the requirements here is you need to show the ownership. What is important about this is showing the ownership, but under the policy, it is not required for you to show how do you get the money to first purchase the property. Let's talk about the property. So let's say you bought a property 10 years ago. It is not a standard policy for you to demonstrate that how did you derive or where did you get the money, you know, to purchase the property. The immigration would look into, you know, the history, your background, yeah, your profile, where your sources of income are mostly coming from. Are you a salary employee or are you a business owner? And they will determine whether or not the amount of the assets that you owned, it makes sense. For example, you could have purchased the property with much lower amount, and the property could have appreciated 50 or 80% more today. They are looking at the current value, yeah. Unless the case officer is suspicious about, you know, your assets and also where the money is coming from. Otherwise, all you need to do is to show, you know, the current value of the assets as well as, you know, the ownership. So you're proving by, in terms of if it is property, your title deed, your sales and purchase agreement. If it is the assets in the bank, you show the bank statements.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Desmond. Also, the next one in regards to 132A, is there any age bracket qualify? What if I'm already 60 years old, but still active in managing a business?
Sure. Look, there is an age requirement for the 132A pathway, and that is the main applicant is under 55 years of age. But there's a big but here. It is possible if the state or territory government agrees to get a waiver for that. And some states and territory governments are more receptive to this, some are less receptive. Western Australia, South Australia tend to be the most flexible with this. And the general rule of thumb, let's say for Western Australia, is if you increase the investment you're making so the investment in the business in this case, by 50%, then they will give you an age waiver. And I had someone during Western Australia last year that was 65 years of age who got an age waiver. They required a little bit more than the 50% in that case, but they gave them the age waiver and they were 65 years of age when normally they have to be under 55 years of age. And so we did that through talking to the state government and getting their approval, prior approval before we did the nomination application. So absolutely, we can cater for cases that are beyond the official age limitation.
All right, thank you so much, James. And on to the next one. Can one still apply for the visa 188E? Can you please tell us more about this visa?
Sure. Well, this 18E, it is also about you securing the funding from the venture capital, from the venture capital based upon the current requirements. But take notes, this funding model doesn't work at this point of time. In fact, it is not an easy process and procedures based upon the past records. There weren't many application went through. And take notes, this visa is also going to be replaced. The funding model is going to be replaced later on by the endorsement from the state and territory governments. Yes, if let's say you meet the requirements at this moment, you secured funding, you have a genuine business to run, to set up. And this visa, what is interesting about this visa is, unlike 18A, you need to meet certain requirements in terms of running the business over a minimum of 2 years, having a business of at least 30%. These requirements doesn't apply on the 188E. Yeah. So you do have also a short window of times to apply if you meet that requirements. And we handle this very carefully. We will take your case and to discuss with the respective states government first to see if if it is going to be a smooth process, before we have you on board. We can support you. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Desmond. Okay, on to the next one. I am 65 years old this year. Generally, which of the investment program or business program will qualify for me?
Sure. I mean, the easiest answer would be the SIV, the $5 million one, because that doesn't have any age limitation. So we don't have to get any complicated age waiver. So that's a straightforward answer. But the other ones, the 1.5 million, the business innovation, the 132A, significant business owner, we can do those as well, but we do have to go through a process. As I mentioned before, we've got to negotiate with the state or territory government to get a waiver for that age. And, some state and territory governments are very receptive to this. Some are not. Like Victoria government, I would not expect them to do an age waiver. I'm not aware that they have done age waivers. But other ones like Western Australia and South Australia in particular are very receptive towards this, and we can negotiate for that age waiver. So straightforward, the 5 million, there's no problem with age there. The other ones we can, but we've got to negotiate the age waiver.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we have a question on, James mentioned migration to Portugal and New Zealand through real estate investments. Do we have webinars for these countries? Yes, definitely we have webinars for Portugal and New Zealand as well. We have the full information for that. We can share with you shortly after this. And the next one, if I buy a vineyard of 3 million on a loan, but with 0 down, hypothetically, will it qualify?
Sorry, buying what?
A vineyard.
A vineyard.
Yes, 3 million on loan. Will I qualify?
Okay, now, first of all, when we talk about buying a winery, the visa, the normal visa requirements, if it is for the purpose of the business migration like 18A or 132A, it does require, I need to emphasize, it does require your involvement in the business. Yeah, it is not purely buying over a winery and leave it and take it as an investment. Okay. Now, using the loan to buy it. Now, when we talk about this 188A and 132A, So the investment or buying over a winery just comes after the visa granted. Yeah, there's no requirements for you to invest it during the processing time, or rather until the visa is granted. The amount of money for you to transfer over to Australia for the purpose of buying the business is not subjected to a review, or you are not required to prove where does the money coming from, whether or not it is from a loan or it is from you liquidating certain assets. Okay, so but if you are thinking about buying over a winery, 3 million for the purpose of 188B, which is the government bond investment, or 188C, then it doesn't, because those investments are very specific or limited to just the government bond or the private or the commercial funds. Okay, so we need to see what are you going, which pathway are you going for, and this winery, is it going to be for the 1A purposes or 132A purposes? Okay, so I do have specific, or there's quite a similar clients who I gotten him a winery in New South Wales, and this is the winery where the clients are restructured in a way that he is handling the export and the market developments in the Asia, so he's able to continue to live in Malaysia while the business and the winery it is continue to be operated with all other the existing business partner, and so he does involve in the business to meet the immigration requirements in terms of developing the Asian markets.
Okay, thank you so much, Desmond, for that detailed information. And the next one on 188B, to meet the requirement to stay 2 years out of 4 years, each of the visa holder, do they need to meet the requirement, or only the main applicant? For example, we have family of 5.
Yeah, okay. I might just touch upon 2 things first. Before I talk about that family structure, so for Australia, we can include children up to the age of 22, so under 23 years of age. So we can include children that are at the adult stage, provided they are still dependent upon the family and are not married and not working. So usually in full-time study, but they don't have to be. So in terms of answering this question, only the primary applicant for the PR stage needs to show that 2 years of stay in Australia. Now, I said the primary applicant for the PR stage. It doesn't have to be the same person that was the primary applicant for the first stage. So let's say the husband is the main applicant for the initial visa, the 188. It can be the wife that goes down to Australia and spends that 2 years in Australia to qualify for the second stage. The requirement for this is that the bond is then put under joint names. So if it's under joint names, either the husband or the wife can be the person qualifying with that 2 years of residence, but it only needs to be done by one person who's going to qualify for that PR stage.
All right, and just a continuation of that. So for the children above 22 years, how can they be a PR?
You want me to continue?
Sure, maybe just to finish that up.
Sure. So, I mean, if they don't qualify under this, and I should point out too, there is no limitation in terms of the PR stage, but we're talking about the entry requirements for the start of the program for the 188 initial stage. So if they don't meet the requirements to qualify, then they cannot be included in that application. Just as a side note, New Zealand investment migration can include children up to 24 years of age. So that's a little bit more extensive. So the investment side for New Zealand, which both Desmond and I are licensed for, does include children up to 24. But with Australia, unfortunately, if they don't qualify, then they can't be included in that application. Then we could look at other pathways, because we're very experienced. We've been doing this for many years. We can advise on other options. It could be the children studying in Australia to qualify for skilled migration later. They could perhaps go under entrepreneur routes. So we could look at other options for the children, but they couldn't be included in this application if they don't qualify.
All right, thank you so much, James. So I think we kind of covered all the questions today. Is there anything else, James and Desmond, we would like to share with us today before we end?
Stay in touch with us if you have any other questions. subsequent to this webinar, I guess there's a lot of information here for you to digest. And if you have any questions, do contact us with the number that is listed here. And if you meet the requirements and you're toying with the idea to do it or not, I think you should seriously think about it. And you don't have you don't have too much time to make a decision. I would suggest that you think about it and initiate the process by end of next month, to be safe. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you can't do it after that. You can, just that, we have to work on the alternative to speed up your application. And then depending on whether or not we are able to secure the nomination from the respective states government in time. Yeah. So that's my advice. Thank you.
I think from my side, don't disqualify yourself, talk to us. Even if you're not sure, talk to us. There's a lot of information. I mean, we've only given a very small snapshot, and some of the questions that have come up have been great. And we could talk about all of this detail, but it would take hours. I teach other migration agents. I teach and train other migration agents in business and investor visas. And I did one class last week, and that was a 3-hour class. And I still don't get to cover everything. And that's teaching the industry on business and investment migration. It is a very complex subject, but you come to the right people. We can certainly assist you with this, and talk to us. That's the best thing. If you're interested in this, even if you're not sure, you think you might not be eligible, talk to us, because we can often find other strategies as well to get you through. We've helped clients where they've approached us for a business visa. They haven't been eligible, but we've actually used other techniques and other strategies to get them across the line, to get them the PR. So the best thing is talk to us, and we can give you the right advice for your situation.
That's right. Thank you so much, James and Desmond, for that conclusion. So everyone, thank you again for attending. And once again, if you would really be interested in this, so just come and contact us, send us an inquiry, send us an email, or just send us a WhatsApp, and our staff will be in touch with you to arrange a consultation. So thank you again, everyone. So we hope you have a good day today. Please be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.